This is the March on Washington Film Festival, and these films are all about a very important era in our nation's history. And as I watched films in New York last week and these here and in Atlanta, one of the brilliant moves of this festival was to incorporate music because it was an important part of the civil rights movement. One of the films we saw last week, and you'll see here this week, is Soundtrack of a Revolution. But what I said last week and I say tonight is that music was not the backdrop to what we were doing. We use that term now, this is the soundtrack of my life, but music was the spine, an inherent part, a soul of what we were going through. That quote from Josephine Baker talks about what music means to people. I'm Issa Sarabay, and it is my honor to be the moderator of a very exciting panel this evening. And when we're finished with the panel, there's a little bit more after that, so please sit tight and stay tuned. And let me just say, y'all were not right for laughing at those background dances. Bless their hearts, they were trying. Our first speaker, born and raised in Trinidad, he moved to the United States at the age of 22 with his sights set on diving head, neck, shoulders into our culture, especially in New York. He attended Howard, Harvard, and Johns Hopkins University and achieved his doctorate, and went on to teach at several institutions, including, but not limited to, UMass Amherst, Vassar, Michigan, Howard, and Temple, breathing fire and shaking up the status quo everywhere he went. Along the way, he has met and studied and corresponded or worked with and inspired by many of the giants of the 20th century. Frantz Fanon, Paul Robeson, George Jackson, Eric Williams, E. Franklin Fraser, Sterling Brown, Abby Lincoln, Max Roach, Kwame Ture, Amiri Baraka, Haile Gerima, Randy Weston, Sun Ra. I was teasing him earlier and saying like that movie, Forrest Gump, where they put Forrest in all these important places in history. You talk about a time in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and this brother will say, yeah, I was there when they were doing such and such. He has been everywhere in the corner of the picture. He found an academic home for his prodigious talents at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County for over 25 years, chairing the Africana Studies Department, and retired in 2007. He continues to be much beloved by generations of seekers of historical and cultural truth. It is my great pleasure to bring Dr. Ackland Lynch. It was known as the Sound of Philadelphia, music written and produced by the powerhouse team of Gamble and Huff. They boast a roster of hits for artists including Teddy Pendergrass, McFadden and Whitehead, Ain't No Stopping Us Now, the OJs, Billy Paul, Jones Girls, the Dells, the Stylistics, Phyllis Hyman, People's Choice, Patti LaBelle, MFSB, Lou Rawls, Jerry Butler, Gene Carn, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Force of Nature, and many more. A Gamble and Huff song is played somewhere in the world every 15 minutes. That level of success is more than remarkable. But this man then turned his brilliance in the music industry into a level of community activism and urban revitalization that has touched and changed the lives of millions. His Universal Companies, which he co-founded with his wife, runs several charter schools, family and student resource centers, affordable and senior housing developments, and residential complexes in Philadelphia, Newark, and Camden. It is my honor to bring Mr. Kenny Gamble to the stage. Put myself in the middle. Thank you, sir. So one of the things we wanted to do with these discussions, at least I did for this evening, is to remind us again that this era, we saw a movie about a man and about an era in history, but it is not in isolation. African American people's lives didn't begin with slavery and just erupt now, and the people that are leaders that have emerged as artists and leaders were not in isolation. There's a legacy. So we wanted to talk a bit about it first, putting Sam Cooke in a historical and cultural context. So he joins a list of musicians who started in the church, and I wanted to start by asking Brother Ackland to talk about that strain of spiritual music to which Sam Cooke was an heir, and that has powered not just our people, but many people for eons. That strain of music that seems to run parallel or like the spine through everything we do. You have a microphone nearby?
It is often said in the beginning was the Word. Sometimes I believe in the beginning was music, was sound, and then dance, and then the Word. People who spoke about what this music really represented, because it was the spiritual affirmation of the group, the tribe, the nation. And we must come to grips with the fact that the music, the spiritual definition of music in the United States of America comes from its earliest experience in the gospel, the spiritual, the blues, and whatever we choose to name it. Because we have shifted from name, to jazz, to popular, to bebop, to hip-hop, to everything we have done this dance.
Exactly.
But it is the music of a people who themselves have found definition in their existence here. And Sam Cooke represents the very essence and the best of that. In his life, early developed like many young people, learning to sing in the church, with their parents teaching them, belonging to the choirs and participating in that rich Christian tradition that Rayford Logan and others take us back, way back into the 19th century. In that experience, we find that that collective spiritual experience had a dimension to it that was essential to our day-to-day lives. And what we saw, what we thought, how we reacted and respected each other, our divine love for each other, that came out of that spiritual definition called the church. Now when our young people in the 20th century decided to move away from that music into the more secular music, as it was called later on, there were real challenges. I can't tell you how much pain that Thomas Dorsey suffered as a writer, as a thinker, as a person who was about to say, we ought to look at another way of expressing the spiritual definition. And the impact it had on the conflicts of Dinah Washington as a singer. The impact it had on our churches, so that by the time we get to Nat King Cole, by the time we get to Duke Ellington, by the time we get to Sam Cooke, that beautiful young voice decided that there was another way in which we could express the very essence of our being. And it is that I found very difficult. It was not an easy decision, and there were tremendous conflicts. However, inside of it, we have seen ourselves actualize, where now the world is in touch with us and our spiritual definition that comes out of music that represents the very essence of our lives.
So one more piece I wanted to ask you to set it in this historical context. When you speak about what was happening around the world in the 50s and 60s, that was part of the political and cultural scene that he and the civil rights movement emerged in.
World War II was essential to the challenges that we were faced with globally. The Depression years were conflicting years for us. And we survived those years as a result of our ability to use this incredible music, art, dance, theater, to use those vehicles of expression to say that we now have an essential part of what this global matrix represents. So we saw out of that the tremendous work of Duke Ellington, the tremendous work of Count Basie, the tremendous work of Jimmy Rushing, the tremendous work of Dinah Washington, as I mentioned before. We saw that kind of work that was parallel with the spiritual work of the gospel singers. So that the blues, the gospel, the jazz, whatever it was that statement of who we are and how do we define and see ourselves on a global basis. Because the same thing was happening at the same time in Africa, in South Africa, in the Caribbean, in Brazil. The same time in the post-World War II period, people were searching out of that inner voicing that was able to express themselves. So that work evolved, that we call the blues. Because you can't have, if you listen to reggae, it is an expression of the blues. If you listen to calypso, it is a statement of the blues. If you listen to the Brazilians' music, it is an expression of the blues. Began to talk to us because it represented the truth of our existence. The blues speaks to the truth. But when we go back into that truth and we discover Paul Robeson in post-World War II saying, "No more auction block for me." How do I take that gospel song and define my life? That there will be no more auction block for me, but I am now a person, free and sovereign, in which I can express my culture, my understanding of the world in which I come from. And out of that is elevated the tremendous music that Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and others brought to us, which is then transferred into popular forms with Ray Charles and Sam Cooke and others, that is going to lead us all the way from there to my good brother here, Mr. Gamble.
So in some of the other movies you'll see this week, you'll also see a lot of the songs that were sung during the civil rights movement. And I wanted to ask you, Brother Kenny, about the path of not just the music, but of the musicians, and this path of activism that some of the music and musicians took coming out of that era. And I wanted to know from you, was that a difficult stance to take for an artist? What were some of the conflicts that they may have faced in the industry as well as outside?
Well, first I'd like to say Sam Cooke, that song You Send Me brings me back to a time when I was cleaning windows for a family that my mother worked for. And I spent the night over there and they had a radio right beside my bed. There was a disc jockey in Philadelphia, his name was Georgie Woods. And he had just got this record, You Send Me. And he must have played it 20 times. And I just laid there and it put me to sleep. I mean, it was a real, it left a real imprint on my mind. But you know, the emotionalism that comes through music, and most people would sing for nothing, you know. But you must remember that on the other side of it, there's an industry. And I think that the worst thing that can happen to anyone or any group of people is to not have the information that they need. And unfortunately, the African American community was denied the right to read or write. At one particular time, it was the law of this land. And while looking at this documentary, I just saw the determination that was in those people who were protesting. And the music gave them something to fill their emotions. And I just remember Sam Cooke, I mean, Change Is Gonna Come is a chilling song, but I think that the most dynamic song, I mean, in my lifetime, was James Brown, when he had a song called I'm Black and I'm Proud. I think that song was unbelievable, because when I was going to high school, if you would call an African American black, he was ready to fight you. Our people didn't want to be black. They didn't want to be who we are. And I think the most important thing that can happen to any group of people is to be who they are. And you have to be able to search for that. And I think music helps. I think it helps relax you. It helps to give you a sense of euphoric. But then the realities come. And I think through Sam Cooke, owning his own publishing, keeping his songwriter benefits, and starting his own record company. In fact, J.W. Alexander, I had the opportunity to meet him many, many years ago. And he's kind of like a legend in the music industry, because there wasn't many African Americans who were equipped with the information to know the business side of the industry. And so, James Brown, he was another one. And you have quite a few that learned the industry. And I think they were, in answer to your question, I think that they were penalized, many of those artists. In fact, you know, Gambling Love, we were penalized many times for demanding, you know, ownership of our songs and our masters, and just, you know, and being in the business of the music industry.
So it seems like, besides making music that people sang during the protest era, the very fact of owning their own music, writing it and publishing it, was enacting some of what they were singing about and fighting for. They were living the civil rights movement by trying to get that kind of economic power.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, even doing, when you know, hindsight is 20/20. So when you look back and see the inspiration that was in those freedom fighters, dogs biting them, I mean, they just treated the black woman just terrible. I mean, just threw her around and beat up our women, and so when you start to look at the struggles that we've been through, I look at when it came time for, and this is just my observation, when the whole world was watching America. The whole world was watching America talk about the land of the free and everybody's created equal, but all of this stuff was coming out that you had to have colored bathrooms, colored water fountains. I mean, it's unbelievable that a people would even think that they are superior to another human being. But this actually really happened, just like the brother said. It wasn't just here, it was in South Africa, it's all over the world. And I think that the number one thing that, I wish I would have been there with Martin Luther King and then when they were sitting at the table with Lyndon Johnson, me personally. Because it's one thing to have a Voting Rights Act, and they have the civil rights and laws and so forth, whatever. But the thing that was not done, in my view, was a deal wasn't made. There was no money involved. And the kind of treatment that our people received, there should be some money involved in it. And that's just
reparations.
Well, I mean, you know, I read up on the American Indians, and you know, some of the Indians, they don't even have to pay tax. Even if they would just say you don't have to pay no taxes for 100 years, or give us something.
Yeah.
You understand? And I think that that's yet to come. I see y'all feel the same way I feel. That's good.
Brother Kenny, one more thing. What was it that impelled you to take your success as a musician and a writer and running your own label and turning it into the kind of community activism that you have been doing the last few decades?
Well, as I said a moment ago, that music is very emotional. And it's one thing listening to music, but it's another thing when you're writing music. That's emotions on a whole nother level. And my partner and I, Leon Huff, we had an office where it was just he and I and a piano and a tape recorder. And every day we would write songs. I was really blessed to be able to do that also. And you felt yourself being like, you know, the inspiration that comes through the individual to write the songs. It's something that you cannot control, number one. But you feed off of the environment that you're in. So say, for example, a song like Love Train, when we were writing Love Train. And Huff and I were sitting there, we were looking at television, and much like the world is today, we said, boy, the world is so messed up. God, I mean, this guy's fighting this one, and there's a war here, there's a war there, you know. They say people need to love one another. And so we talked about, need to be a love train. We said, oh, that's a good one. And so we got on the piano and Huff, you know, and we wrote Love Train, you know, and you can't really explain how things like that happen.
But you can feel it when you hit a good one.
Well, you can feel it. But we had a tape recorder, so, you know, a lot of times, you know, you don't remember what you're doing. And so we had to record everything we're doing and then learn it ourselves. And one other one, and I'll make this short, For the Love of Money. Y'all heard that song? I know who I'm talking to. But, you know, we were talking one day, and we were talking about the Bible. And we're talking about how the scripture says, you know, for the love of money is the root of all evil. And I was telling him, I said, it's not money. I said, it's the love of money. So we started talking about what people will do, that people will do anything for money. And of course, what happened is that we had another Love Train moment. And we started.
Well, still from their brother, for the love of money.
And still from their mother, you know. And so it was that type of thing. But I would think that Motown was the blueprint and the thing that inspired us most. That because we had to start our own record company, we had to start our own publishing company, we had to start all of these things because there was no way in for us. Every door was slammed in our faces. We had songs underneath our arm every day trying to sell our songs and the little groups that we had. But so we started our own record company, and fortunately, the world and the industry was different because you had black disc jockeys. And that was the number one thing that we had, was the black disc jockeys, that they helped us. We made music that they could play. And we played music, we just wrote songs for everybody, but many of the avenues for pop radio stations, and the only reason you needed pop radio stations is because, say, for example, here in Washington, you had WOL, that was our station, WOL, Jim Kelsey and Bobby Bennett and all these guys. But maybe they had like 1,200 watts to their radio station. But you would have another white stations here that would have 50,000 watts, non-directional. And so you needed that coverage. And those were the days for AM records. But then when for AM stations, I'm sorry. But then the day came for FM radio. And when FM radio became popular, then the black radio stations had 50,000, maybe some of them had even 100,000 watches. You didn't need the pop stations anymore. And so black music became big business. We started an organization called the Black Music Association, which would teach a lot of young people about the value of owning their own rights. At least you develop an asset for yourself. If you want to sell them later, whatever you want to do, at least you're acquiring assets for yourself. And I think that's one of the things that made us, like, I guess you would call it like a threat or whatever it is to the industry, because the industry was used to, just like America was used to, just like the world has been used to, taking advantage of black people.
We're gonna, how's my time? Oh, okay. We can do like 1 or 2 quick questions if you have any for them. And while you're thinking about one, I wanted to ask both of you, why do you think, what are the barriers to artists and musicians today to being as outspoken as they were with the music and with their stances in the 60s and 70s?
Well, I think that the rap artists, music has changed tremendously. And I think each generation has its own music because they write the songs based on the world that they see. And the world has changed greatly. And so the young people, they write songs that a lot of people say, oh man, I don't like that song, but I don't like the world. That's the problem with it, is, and especially in the black community, because that's basically the way I see things from the black community standpoint and black music. But I will say this, that I really appreciate those rap artists because they have sampled a lot of our music. Jay-Z and all these guys, and Kanye West and all these guys, they have sampled our music throughout the years, and that just goes to show me that our music is relevant even in this time. And because those message songs, those songs that inspire people, they still exist. And so when you see the young people today, especially the rap artists, they're just talking about the world like it is right now. This is what's happening right now. The young women that are in the videos and so forth and whatever, you know, people complain about it. They complain about all this stuff. But what are you going to do about it is the question. Are you going to do anything that's going to help change the African American community? If you're not, then you need to get out of the way.